Hi, y'all. You know what time it is. Get into it! Get into it! Yes! It's story time with Chris. A little bit too much Carmax on my lips was dry, y'all. My apologies. It's story time with Chris, y'all. Welcome back. I hope everybody's had a lovely Saturday. Now, before I begin, we got to talk about some things. We got to talk about a couple of things that I saw today. So, I had an observation today while I was at work. There was a group of young people that were coming into the store, and particularly there was this one young man whose mask was kind of slipping, it wasn't fully on. And there was a woman who is a local who took it upon herself to police masks within the store and asked him to pull his mask up. And he kind of jeered at her, which caused her to get irritated, which caused him and his friends to get irritated. So everybody's just at each other's throats, like throwing comments back and forth, back to back to back. One of which was actually a very old school creative clapback, which kudos to that girl. It's not okay, but kudos for creativity. Reason why I was bringing this up, because a dear friend of mine, who shall remain nameless, had to mediate the situation, which she did incredibly well. And what I will say is this, and hear me within the sound of my voice: there is always a better way and a more tactful way to get your point across to somebody. It's not always what you say, children, it's how you say it. And if you felt so inclined, and if you feel uncomfortable by someone who is not wearing a mask, or their mask isn't completely covering the nose, or just like this, which is so silly to me, because it defeats the purpose of having one on if you just wear it from here, or here, as some people have done, which is weird. If you feel so inclined, if you feel uncomfortable, just go to an attendant. Go to somebody that works there and say, hey, I'm sorry to bother you. There's an individual in this area that isn't, following mask protocol. I feel uncomfortable. Is there any way that you could speak to them? That is a lot better than taking your frustration and disguising it as a self-righteous attempt to correct somebody's behavior because you feel so inclined. There is always a better way to talk to people. For me, as somebody that's worked in a restaurant and works in retail, customer service in general, do not treat us like robots. Do not treat us as though we don't have feelings. We are human beings. We have feelings, we have dreams, we have family, we have loved ones, we have partners, we have things that are important to us. So please talk to us in the correct way, regardless of how demeaning you think our job is, which, matter of factly, it's not demeaning, because where I work is an essential spot. I work at a grocery store. I work at the deli until my full-time job opens back up, thankfully. But there is a better way to talk to people, and you can do so with kindness and with better tact than what this particular woman had done earlier today. So that's all I wanted to say. Be better to each other, because what I ask you to do, though it is frustrating to see people not follow the rules, that's their right. They can do that. They can take their life in their own hands. That's up to them, okay? It is not your job to pass judgment on them. It is not your job to police to them what they should or should not be doing. What you should then do is lead with kindness. Either mind your own business, or just politely say, excuse me, do you mind pulling your mask up? Or find an attendant. That's all I'm going to say on that. Because we don't have to be nasty to each other. We do not have to be nasty to each other, I assure you. It ain't that deep. I mean, it's deep, but it's not that deep. You feel what I'm saying? Like, people are getting vaccinated. People getting stimulated as of this weekend. For those who have, blessings to you and your loved ones. But there's always a better way, y'all. We don't have to be nasty to each other. Especially for my people, they expect us to act like that. But most of the time, we're better than what they perceive, okay? And that's all I ask, is that we try to put our best foot forward. And even if somebody does respond back with us with nastiness, you don't have to do that in turn. It's very juvenile. There's no need for it. Try to do, as my friend Brittany says, don't apologize, just do better. Just do better for yourself and for the other person, okay? That's all I want to say on that. But thank you for those who have, taken the time to see my pictures. I had a wonderful photo shoot, and I just felt so free and just spring-like and happy and expressive. It was great. It was really good. Shout out to my friend Patrick. He's cool. He's an amazing photographer in town. Tea tonight is constant comment. I was actually going to switch it up and do a lemon zinger, but I want to do some black tea today. Because I'm feeling blackety black today. Melanated today. Fresh to death today. But it's all good. Oh, hold on 1 second, y'all. Alrighty. I'm back. My apologies with that, y'all. But without further ado, we will begin. I do not own the music that you may hear in the background, which is Final Fantasy VIII and their soundtrack. And Final Fantasy VIII was my very first Final Fantasy game that I ever played growing up. You've all heard me talk about this on Storytime with Chris a couple of times. I love the music. I think it deserves a PS4, PS5 remake. Most definitely. Will we ever see it? I don't know. Ooh, excuse me, y'all. Chapter 12. Sorcery and Sudden Vengeance. Oh, excuse me. Meanwhile, Trumpkin and the two boys arrived at the dark little stone archway which led into the inside of the mound, and two sentinel badgers leapt up with bare teeth and asked them in snarling voices, "Who goes there?" "Trumpkin," said the dwarf, "bringing the High King of Narnia out of the far past." The badgers nosed at the boys' hands. "At last," they said, "at last." "Give us a light, friends," said Trumpkin. The badgers found a torch just inside the arch, and Peter lit it and handed it to Trumpkin. "The DLF had better lead," he said. "We don't know our way about this place." Trumpkin took the torch and went ahead into the dark tunnel. It was a cold, black, musty place with an occasional bat fluttering in the torchlight, and plenty of cobwebs. The boys, who had been mostly in the open air ever since that morning at the railway station, felt as if they were going into a trap or a prison. I say, Peter," whispered Edmund. "Look at those carvings in the walls. Don't they look old? And yet we're older than that. When we were here last, they hadn't been made." "Yes," said Peter, "that makes one think." The dwarf went on ahead and then turned to the right, then to the left, and then down some steps and then to the left again. Then at last they saw a light ahead, light from under a door. And now for the first time they heard voices, for they had come to the door of the central chamber. The voices inside were angry ones. Someone was talking so loudly that the approach of the boys and the dwarf had not been heard. "Don't like the sound of that," whispered Trumpkin to Peter. "Let's listen for a moment." All three stood perfectly still on the outside of the door. "You know well enough," said a voice, "why the horn was not blown at sunrise this morning. Have you forgotten that Miraz fell upon us almost before Trumpkin had gone? We were fighting for our lives for the space of 3 hours or more? I blew it when I first had a breathing space." "I'm not likely to forget it," came the angry voice, "when my dwarves bore the brunt of the attack and 1 in 5 of them fell." "That's Nickabrick," whispered Trumpkin. "For shame, dwarf," came a thick voice. "We all did as much as the dwarves, and none more than the king." "Tell that tale your own way for all I care," answered Nickabrick. "But whether it was that the horn was blown too late, or whether there was no magic in it, no help has come. You great clerk, you master magician, you know all. Are you still asking us to hang our hopes on Aslan and King Peter and all the rest of it?" "I must confess, I cannot deny it, that I am deeply disappointed in the results of the operation," came the answer. "To speak plainly," said Nickabrick, "your wallet's empty, your eggs addled, your fish uncaught, your promises broken. Stand aside then and let others work, and that is why the help will come," said Trufflehunter. "I stand by Aslan. Have peace. Like us beasts, the help will come. It may be even now at the door." "Pah!" snarled Nickabrick. "You badgers would have us wait till the sky falls, and we can all catch larks. I tell you, we can't wait. Food is running short. We lose more than we can afford at every encounter. Our followers are slipping away. And why? Asked Trufflehunter. I tell you why. Because it is noised among that we have called on the kings of old, and the kings of old have not answered. The last words Trumpkin spoke before he went were, if you must blow the horn, do not let the army know while you blow it, or what you hope from it. But that same evening, everyone seemed to know. You better shove your gray snout in a hornet's nest, Badger, than suggest that I am the blab, said Knickerbrick. Take it back or... Oh, stop it, both of you, said King Caspian. I want to know what it is that Knickerbrick keeps on hitting, what we should do. But before that, I want to know who those two strangers are whom he has brought into our council, and who stand there with their eyes open and their mouths shut. They are friends of mine, said Knickerbrick. And what better right have you yourself to be here than you are a friend of Trumpkin's and the Badgers? And what right has that old dotard in the black gown to be here except that he is your friend? Why am I to be the only one who can't bring in his friends? His Majesty is the king to whom you have sworn allegiance, said Trufflehunter sternly. Court manners, sneered Knickerbrick. But in this hole we may talk plainly. You know, and he knows, that this Telmarine boy will be king of nowhere and nobody in a week, unless we can help him out of the trap in which he sits. Perhaps, said Cornelius, your new friends would like to speak for themselves. You there, who and what are you? Worshipful Master Doctor, came a thin, whining voice. So please you, I'm only a poor old woman, and I am very obliged to his worshipful dwarfship for his friendship. I'm sure his Majesty, bless his handsome face, has no need to be afraid of an old woman that's nearly doubled over with the rheumatics and hasn't 2 sticks to put under her kettle. I have some poor little skill, not like yours, Master Doctor. Of course, in small spells and cantrips that I'd be glad to use against our enemies if it was agreeable to all concerned, for I hate them. Oh, yes, no one hates better than me. That is all most interesting and, satisfactory, said Dr. Cornelius. I think I now know what you are, madam. Perhaps your other friend, Knickerbrick, would give some account of himself? A dull, gray voice, at which Peter's flesh crept, replied, I am hunger. I am thirst. Where I bite, I hold till I die. And even after death, they must cut out my mouthful from my enemy's body and bury it with me. I can fast 100 years and not die. I can lie 100 nights on the ice and not freeze. I can drink a river of blood and not burst. Please show me your enemies. And it is in the presence of those two that you wish to disclose your plan, said Caspian. Yes, said Knickerbrick, and by their help that I mean to execute it. There was a minute or two during which Trumpkin and the boys could hear Caspian and his 2 friends speaking in low voices, but could not make out what they were saying. Then Caspian spoke aloud. Well, Knickerbrick, he said, we will hear your plan. There was a pause so long that the boys began to wonder if Knickerbrick were ever going to begin. When he did, it was in a lower voice, as if he himself did not much like what he was saying. All said and done, he muttered, none of us knows the truth about the ancient days in Narnia. Trumpkin believed none of the stories. I was ready to put them to the trial. We tried first the horn, and it failed. If there ever was a High King Peter and Queen Susan and King Edmund and a Queen Lucy, then ever they have not heard us, or they cannot come, or they are our enemies. Or they are on their way, put in Trufflehunter, the Badger. You can go on saying that till Miraz has fed us all to his dogs. As I was saying, we have tried one link in the chain of old tales, and it has done us no more good. Well, but when your sword breaks, you draw your dagger. The stories tell of other powers besides the ancient kings and queens. How if we could call them up? If you mean Aslan, said Truffle Hunter, it's all one calling on him and on the kings. They were his servants. If he will not send them, is he more likely to come himself? No, you're right there, said Knickerbrick. Aslan and the kings go together. Either Aslan is dead, or he is not on our side. Or else something stronger than himself keeps him back. And if he did come, how do we know he'd be our friend? He was not always a good friend to dwarves, by all that's told. Not even to all beasts. Ask the wolves. And anyway, he was in Narnia only once that I ever heard of, and he didn't stay long. You may drop Aslan out of the reckoning. I was thinking of someone else. There was no answer, and for a few minutes it was so still that Edmund could hear the wheezing and snuffling breath of the badger. Who do you mean? Said Caspian at last. I mean a power so much greater than Aslan's that it held Narnia spellbound for years and years if the stories are true. Care to guess who it might be he's referring to? Oh, excuse me. Excuse me. The White Witch! Said 3 voices all at once. And from the noise, Peter guessed that 3 people had leapt to their feet. Yes, said Knickerbrick very slowly and distinctively. I mean the witch. Sit down again. Don't all take fright at a name as if you were children. We want power, and we want a power that will be on our side. As for power, do not the stories say that the witch defeated Aslan and bound him and killed him on that very stone, which is over there just beyond the light? But they also say that he came to life again, said the badger sharply. Yes, they say, answered Knickerbrick, but you'll notice that we hear precious little about anything he did afterward. He just fades out of the story. How do you explain that if he really came to life? Isn't it much more likely that he didn't, and that the stories say nothing more about him because there was nothing more to be said? He established the kings and queens, said Caspian. A king who has just won a great battle can usually establish himself with the help of a performing lion, said Knickerbrick. There was a fierce growl, probably from Truffle Hunter. And anyway, Knickerbrick continued, what came of the kings and their reign? They faded too, but it's very different with the witch. They say she ruled for 100 years. 100 years of winter. There's power if you like. There's something practical. But heaven on earth, said the king, haven't we always been told that she was the worst enemy of all? Wasn't she a tyrant 10 times worse than Miraz? Perhaps, said Knickerbrick in a cold voice. Perhaps she was for you humans, if there were any of you in those days. Perhaps she was for some of the beasts. She stamped out the beavers, I dare say. At least there are none of them in Narnia now. But she got on all right with us dwarves. I'm a dwarf, and I stand by my own people. We're not afraid of the witch. But you've joined us, said Truffle Hunter. Yes, and a lot of good it has done my people so far, snapped Knickerbrick. Who is it sent on all the dangerous raves? The dwarves. Who goes short when the rations fall? The dwarves. Who lies? All lies, said the badger. And so, said Knickerbrick, whose voice now rose to a scream, if you can't help my people, I'll go to someone who can. Is this open treason, dwarf? Asked the king. Put that sword back in its sheath, Caspian, said Knickerbrick. Murder at council, eh? Is that your game? Don't be fool enough to try it. Do you think I'm afraid of you? There's 3 on my side and 3 on yours. Come on, then, snarled Truffle Hunter, but he was immediately interrupted. Stop, 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 said Dr. Cornelius. You go on too fast. The witch is dead, and all the stories agree on that. What does Knickerbrick mean by calling on the witch? That gray and terrible voice, which had spoken only once before, said, Who is she? And then the shrill, whining voice began, Oh, bless his heart, his dear little majesty needn't mind about the White Lady. That's what we call her. being dead. The worshipful Master Doctor is only making game of a poor old woman like me when he says that. Sweet Master Doctor, learned Master Doctor, whoever heard of a witch that really died? You can always get them back. Call her up, said the grave voice. We are all ready. Draw the circle. Prepare the blue fire. Above the steadily increasing growl of the badger and Cornelius's sharp, "What?" rose the voice of King Caspian like thunder. So that's your plan, Knickerbrick. Black sorcery and the calling up of an accursed ghost. And I see who your companions are, a hag and a werewolf. The next minute or so was very confusing. There was an animal roaring, a clash of steel. The boys and Trumpkin rushed in. Peter had a glimpse of a horrible gray gaunt creature, half man and half wolf, in the very act of leaping upon a boy about his own age, and Edmund saw a badger and a dwarf rolling on the floor in a sort of catfight. Trumpkin found himself face to face with the hag, her nose and chin sunk out like a pair of nutcrackers. Her dirty gray hair was flying about her face, and she had just got Dr. Cornelius by the throat. At one slash of Trumpkin's sword, her head rolled on the floor. Then the light was knocked over, and it was all swords, teeth, claws, fists, and boots for about 60 seconds. Then, silence. Are you all right, Ed? I think so, panted Edmund. I've got that brute Knickerbrick, but he's still alive. Weights and water bottles, came an angry voice. It's me you're sitting on. Get off, you're like a young elephant. Sorry, DLF, said Edmund. Is that better? Ow, no, bellowed Trumpkin. You're putting your boot in my mouth. Go away. Is King Caspian anywhere? Asked Peter. I'm here, said a rather faint voice. Something bit me. They all heard the noise of someone striking a match. It was Edmund. The little flame showed his face like looking pale and dirty. He blundered about for a little, found the candle, set it up the table, and lit it. When the flame rose clear, several people scrambled to their feet. 6 faces blinked at one another in the candlelight. We don't seem to have any enemies left, said Peter. That's the hag, dead, and Knickerbrick too. And I suppose this thing is a werewolf. It's so long since I've seen one. Wolf's head and man's body. This means he was just turning from man into wolf at the moment he was killed. And you. I suppose you are King Caspian. Yes, said the other boy, but I've no idea who you are. It's the High King Peter, said Trumpkin. Your Majesty is very welcome, said Caspian. And so is your Majesty, said Peter. I haven't come to take your place, but to put you into it. Your Majesty, said another voice at Peter's elbow. He turned and found himself face to face with the badger. Peter leaned forward, put his arms round the beast, and kissed the furry head. It wasn't a girlish thing for him to do, because he was the High King. Best of badgers, he said. You've never doubted us all through. No credit to me, your Majesty, said Truffle Hunter. I'm a beast, and we don't change. I'm a badger once more, and we hold on. I'm sorry for Knickerbrick, said Caspian. Though he hated me from the very first moment he saw me, he had gone sour inside from long suffering and hating. If we had won quickly, he might have become a good dwarf in the days of peace. I don't know which of us killed him. I'm glad of that. You're bleeding, said Peter. Yes, I'm bitten, said Caspian. It was that wolf thing. Cleaning and bandaging the wound took a long time, and it was done. Trumpkin said, Now, before anything else, we want some breakfast. But not here, said Peter. No, said Caspian with a shudder, and we must send someone to take away the bodies. Let the vermin be flung into a pit, said Peter, but the dwarf we will give to his people to be buried in their own fashion. They breakfasted at last in another of the dark cellars of Aslan's How. It was not such a breakfast as they would have chosen, for Caspian and Cornelius were thinking of venison patties, and Peter and Edmund of buttered eggs and hot coffee. But what everyone got was a little bit of cold bear meat, and a lump of hard cheese, an onion, and a mug of water. but from the way they fell to, anyone would have supposed it was delicious. Hold for 1 second, y'all. Alright. Thank you for those who joined me. Thank you, Brandon. I can't see the other person that's watching, but thank you so much. Alright. Okay. On to the next one. Because after this chapter, tomorrow night we have the 2 chapters left, and then we will be starting our next book in the Chronicles of Narnia, which will be book 5. So then after that, it'll be 2 more books, and we are done. We are done. We've read my 2 major favorites, which is The Horse and His Boy and The Magician's Nephew. But we're going to come to my all-time favorite in the series, which is, after this book, it's 2 books away, which is The Silver Chair. Love that book. Chapter 13. The High King in Command. Now, said Peter as they finished their meal, Aslan and the girls are somewhere close. We don't know when he will act. It is time, no doubt, not ours. In the meantime, he would like us to do what we can on our own. You say, Caspian, we are not strong enough to meet Miraz in pitched battle. I'm afraid not, High King, said Caspian. He was liking Peter very much, but was rather tongue-tied. It was much stranger for him to meet the great kings of the old stories than it was for them to meet him. Very well, then, said Peter. I'll send him a challenge to single combat. No one had thought of this before. Please, said Caspian, could it not be me? I want to avenge my father. You're wounded, said Peter. And anyway, wouldn't it be just laugh at a challenge from you? I mean, we have not seen that you're a king and a warrior, but he thinks of you as a kid. But sire, said the badger, who sat very close to Peter and never took his eyes off him, will he accept a challenge even from you? He knows he has a strong army. Very likely he won't, said Peter, but there's always the chance, and even if he doesn't, we shall spend the best part of the day sending heralds to and fro and all that. But then Aslan may have done something, and at least I can expect the army and strengthen the position. I will send the challenge. In fact, I will write it out at once. Have you pen and ink, Master Doctor? A scholar is never without them, your majesty, answered Dr. Cornelius. Very well, I will dictate, said Peter, and while the doctor spread out a parchment and opened his inkhorn and sharpened his pen, Peter leant back with half-closed eyes and recalled to his mind the language in which he had written such things long ago in Narnia's golden age. Right, he said at last. And now, if you're ready, Doctor? Dr. Cornelius dipped and waited. Peter dictated as follows. Peter, by the gift of Aslan, by election, by prescription, and by conquest, High King over all kings in Narnia, Emperor of the Lone Islands and Lord of Cair Paravel, Knight of the most noble order of the Lion, to Miraz, son of Caspian the Eighth, sometime Lord Protector of Narnia, and now styling himself King of Narnia, greeting. Have you got that? Narnia, greeting, muttered the doctor. Yes, sire. Yes, sire. Then begin a new paragraph, said Peter. For to prevent the infusion of blood, and for the avoiding all inconveniences likely to grow from the wars now levied in our realm of Narnia, it is our pleasure to adventure our royal person on behalf of our trusty and well-beloved Caspian in clean wager of battle, to prove upon your lordship's body that the said Caspian is lawful king under us in Narnia, both by our gift and by the laws of the Telmarines. And your lordship twice guilty of treachery, both in withholding the dominion of Narnia from the said Caspian in the most abominable, don't forget to spell it with an H, Doctor, bloody and unnatural murder of your kindly lord and brother King Caspian IX of that name. Wherefore, we must heartily provoke, challenge, and defy your lordship to the said combat and monumency, and have sent these letters by the hand of our well-beloved and royal brother Edmund, sometime king under us in Narnia, Duke of Lantern Waste and Count of the Western March, Knight of the Noble Order of the Table, to whom we have given full power of determining with your lordship all the conditions of the said battle, given at our lodging in Aslan's Howe, this 12th day of the month, green roof in the first year of Caspian 10th of Narnia. That ought to do, said Peter, drawing a deep breath. And now we must send 2 others with King Edmund. I think the giant ought to be one. He's not very clever, you know, said Caspian. Of course not, said Peter, but any giant looks impressive if only he will keep quiet, and it will cheer him up. But for the other... Upon my word, said Trumpkin, if you want someone who can kill with looks, Reepicheep would be the best. He would indeed, for all I hear, said Peter with a laugh. If only he wasn't so small. They wouldn't even see him till he was close. Send Glenstorm, sire, said Trufflehunter. No one ever laughed at a centaur. An hour later, 2 great lords in the army of Miraz, the Lord Glozell and the Lord Supsibian, strolled along their lines and picking their teeth after breakfast, looked up and saw coming down to them from the wood the centaur and giant Wimbleweather, whom they had seen before in battle, and between them a figure they could not recognize, nor indeed would the other boys at Edmund's school have recognized him if they could have seen him at that moment, for Aslan had breathed upon him at their meeting, and a kind of greatness hung about him. What's to do? Said the Lord Glozell. An attack? A parley, rather, said Supsibian. See, they carry green banners. They are coming to surrender, most likely. He that is walking between the centaur and the giant has no look of surrender in his face, said Glozell. Who can he be? It is not the boy Caspian. No, indeed, said Supsibian. This is a fell warrant, I warn you, whether the rebels have got him from. He is a kinglier man than ever Miraz was, and what mail he wears. None of our smiths can make the like. I wager my dapple Pumley he brings a challenge, not a surrender, said Glozell. How then, said Supsibian, we hold the enemy in our fist here? Miraz would never be so harebrained as to throw away his advantage on a combat. He might be brought to it, said Glozell in a much lower voice. Softly, step a little aside here out of the earshot of the sentries. Now, have I taken your lordship's meaning right? If the king undertook wager of battle, whispered Glozell, why either he would kill or be killed. So, said Supsibian, nodding his head, and if he killed, he would have won this war. Certainly. And if not, why, if not, we should be as able to win it without the king's grace as with him. For I need not tell you, your lordship, that Miraz is not very great captain, and after that we should be both victorious and kingless. And it is your meaning, my lord, that you and I could hold this land quite as conveniently without a king as with one. Glozell's face grew ugly. Not forgetting, said he, that it was we who first put him on the throne, and in all the years that he has enjoyed it, what fruits have come our way? What gratitude has he shown us? Say no more, answered Supsibian. Supsibian just is a bit easier on the tongue. But look, here comes one to fetch us to the king's tent. When they reached Miraz's tent, they saw Edmund and his 2 companions seated outside it and being entertained with cakes and wine, having already delivered the challenge, and withdrawn while the king was considering it. When they saw them thus at close quarters, the 2 Telmarine lords thought all 3 were very alarming. Inside they found Miraz, unarmed and finishing his breakfast. His face was flush. There was a scowl on his brow. There, he growled, flinging the parchment across the table to them. See what a pack of nursery tales our jackanapes of a nephew has sent us. By your leave, sire, said Glozell, if the young warrior whom we have just seen is outside as the King Edmund mentioned in the writing, then I would not call him a nursery tale, but a very dangerous knight. King Edmund? Pah! Said Miraz. Does your lordship believe these old wives' fables about Peter and Edmund and the rest? I believe my eyes, your majesty, said Glozell. Well, this is no purpose, said Miraz, but as touching the challenge, I suppose there is only one opinion between us. I suppose so indeed, sire, said Glozell. And what is that? asked the king. Most infallibly to refuse it, said Glozell, for though I have never been called a coward, I must plainly say that to meet that young man in battle is more than my heart would serve for. And if his brother, the High King, is more dangerous than he, why, on your life, my king, have nothing to do with him.
Plague you, cried Miraz. It is not that sort of counsel I wanted. Do you think I am asking you if I should be afraid to meet this Peter? Do you think I fear him? I wanted your counsel on the policy of the matter, whether we, having the advantage, should hazard it on a wager of battle.
To which I can only answer, your majesty, said Glozell, that for all reasons the challenge should be refused. There is death in the strange face of the night.
There you go again, said Miraz, now thoroughly angry. How are you trying to make it appear that I am as great a coward as your lordship?
Your majesty may say your pleasure, said Glozell sulkily.
You talk like an old woman, Glozell, said the king. What say you, my lord Subsian?
Do not touch it, sire, was the reply. And what your majesty says of the policy of the thing comes in very happily. It gives your majesty excellent grounds for a refusal without any cause for questioning your majesty's honor or grace.
Good heaven! Exclaimed Miraz, jumping to his feet. Are you also bewitched today? Do you think I'm looking for grounds to refuse it? You might as well call me coward to my face!
The conversation was going exactly as the two lords wished, so they said nothing.
I see what it is, said Miraz, after staring at them as if his eyes were starred out of his head. You are as lily-livered as hares yourselves, and have the effrontery to imagine my heart after the likeness of yours. Grounds for refusal, indeed! Excuses for not fighting! Are you soldiers? Are you Telmarines? Are you men, and if I do refuse it, you will think and teach others to think I was afraid, is it not so?
No man of your majesty's age, said Glozell, would be called coward by any wise warrior for refusing the combat with a great warrior in the flower of his youth.
So I am to be a dotard with one foot in the grave, as well as a dastard, roared Miraz. I'll tell you what it is, my lords. With your womanish counsels, you have done the very opposite of your intent. I had meant to refuse it, but I'll accept it. Do you hear it? Accept it! I will not be ashamed because some witchcraft or treason has frozen both your bloods.
We beseech you, your majesty, said Glozell, but Miraz had flung out of the tent, and they could hear him bawling out his acceptance to Edmund. The two lords looked at one another and chuckled quietly. I knew he'd do it if he were properly chafed, said Glozell, but I'll not forget he called me coward. It shall be paid for. There was a great stirring in Aslan's house when the news came back and was communicated to the various creatures. Edmund, with some of the Miraz's captains, had already marked out the place for the combat, and ropes and stakes had been put around it. 2 Telmarines were to stand at 2 of the corners, and 1 in the middle at one side, as marshals of the list. 3 marshals for the other 2 quarters on the other side were to be furnished by the High King. Peter was just explained to Caspian that he could not be one, because right to the throne was what they were fighting about, when suddenly a thick, sleepy voice said,
Your Majesty, please.
Peter turned, and there stood the eldest of the bulgy bears.
If you please, your Majesty. I'm a bear, I am.
To be sure you are, so you are. A good bear, too, I don't doubt, said Peter.
Yes, said the bear, but it was always a right of the bears to supply 1 marshal of the list.
Don't let him, whispered Trumpkin to Peter. He's a good creature, but he'll shame us all. He'll go to sleep, and he will suck his paws in front of the enemy, too. I can't help that, said Peter, because he's quite right. The bears had that privilege. I can't imagine how it'd been remembered all these years when so many other things, have been forgotten.
Please, your Majesty, said the bear.
It is your right, said Peter, and you shall be one of the marshals. But you must remember not to suck your paws.
Of course not, said the bear in a very shocked voice.
Why, you're doing it this minute, bellowed Trumpkin. The bear whipped his paw out of his mouth and pretended he hadn't heard. Sire, came a shrill voice from near the ground. Ah, Reepicheep, said Peter after looking up and down and round as people usually did when addressed by the mouse. Sire, said Reepicheep, my life is ever at your command, and my honor is my own. Sire, I have among my people the only trumpeter in your majesty's army, and I had thought perhaps we might have been sent with a challenge. Sire, my people are grieved. Perhaps it was your pleasure that I shall be a marshal of the list. It would content them.
A noise not unlike the thunder broke out from somewhere overhead at this point, as giant Wimbleweather burst into one of those not very intelligent laughs to which the nicer sort of giants were so liable. He checked himself at once, and looked as grave as a turnip by the time Reepicheep discovered where the noise came from. "I'm afraid it won't do," said Peter very gravely. "Some humans are afraid of mice." "I had observed it, sire," said Reepicheep. "It would not be quite fair to Miraz," Peter continued, "to have in sight anything that might abate the edge of his courage." "Your Majesty is a mirror of honor," said the mouse with one of his admirable bows, "and on this matter we have but a single mind. I thought I heard someone laughing just now. If anyone present wishes to make me the subject of his wit, I am very much at his service, with my sword, whenever he has leisure." An awful silence followed this remark, which was broken by Peter saying, "Giant Wimbleweather and the bear and the centaur Glintstorm shall be our marshals. The combat will be at 2 hours after noon. Dinner at noon, precisely." "I say," said Edmund as they walked away, "I suppose it is all right. I mean, I suppose you can beat him." "That's what I'm fighting him to find out," said Peter. So there's Reepicheep. He is squaring up. He is about that life. He is ready. He is awesome. And that is the end of chapter 14. Chapter 13. So next time we have 2 chapters left, y'all, and we are done. And we will read our next book. But I wanted to say thank you all for watching. Like I said, you don't have to watch these videos when they go live. They are here for you to leisurely watch them as you please. For anybody that follows me on YouTube, I'm trying my best to try to transfer these videos over there, but Facebook has been a little bit wonky these last few days, so I do apologize for that. But I think I've announced this before. Hold on. Oh, there they are. So, I made a video in response to the controversy with the Dr. Seuss Enterprises, them discontinuing those 6 books out of publication, but I decided to read actual Dr. Seuss books that are actually uplifting, which is The Lorax and Oh, the Places You Will Go. These will be on the YouTube channel by tomorrow night, so please bear with me as I get those up. Again, thank you all so very much. Y'all have a wonderful night. Peace, love, and hair grease, y'all.